So, as you all know, the 31st is the deadline for when these new post-Brexit checks from the UK of, everything going into the EU is finally going to take place. And not only just going to the EU, but coming out of the EU as well. So this is going to cause a lot of trouble at the border. This is already causing millions, if not billions, of extra pounds of paperwork, going to add huge costs and time to exporters and importers where they previously did not have to do this type of stuff before. It is going to affect businesses. We have seen this, I don't know how many times before when we've talked about this and these type of checks, how troublesome these types of things are. So this is one of those things of they are going to go ahead with it. I generally think now they are going to go ahead with it because these checks obviously have got to go within 24 hours. And so far, like today is the last day, unless something happens or an announcement happens, probably within I'm doing this video at like 10 o'clock, but it's going to be released a lot later. I do now think they are going to go forward with these checks, and that is going to mean huge chaos at the border with these types of things. So, yeah, they're going to do it, and there is going to be huge problems. So expect later on this week, we're going to be talking about all the chaos going on at the border, and ultimately in the weeks following, businesses that just go, yep, too complex, I'm just not going to bother. And once again, we start to see the stories of, too complex to go and trade into Europe. It's not worth it. We're not competitive anymore. So businesses will end up losing 30 to 40% of their business, and that'll be it. So, as always, but before we get talking about this, we're going to talk about the trade deals because I think it's worth talking about the fact what trade deals have we actually done and what are we trying to do with the ones that are still, shall we say, in progress? Because once again, remember, Brexit was meant to be about us becoming, quote, global Britain, that it didn't matter that we, quote, lost all the trade from Europe because we could make up for it with all these non-EU trade deals. So let's find out how well these trade deals have actually gone. So, but before we do this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Of course, down below, links to my Patreon page, the One of Nation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. And of course, you can click on the like, share, and subscribe button as well. So, trade deals, what have we got so far? Well, of course, the first one was with Japan, and people forget this. The first one was with Japan. So, in late 2020, the then International Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, signed the UK's first major post-Brexit free trade agreement. She said it was when it came into force next year, it would boost trade between the two countries by billions of pounds annually. What do you think happened? Liz Truss goes, this is going to boost our trade billions of pounds annually. What happened? However, it continues, exports to Japan have not quite received this turbocharge promised, falling. So rather than go up, they have fallen to 11.9 billion in a year to June 2022 from 12.3 billion that year. Before, this included a 4.94% in export of goods to 6.1 billion, while services fell over 2% to 5.8 billion. Turns out Japan really doesn't care to do trade with the UK. Why? Because Japan treated the UK as like an entry point into the EU. That was always their thing. And yeah, Rishi Sunak has tried to bribe Nissan up in Sunderland so many times to keep them there. But there's every possibility, and it would not surprise me if they went. It would not surprise me if they either A, pulled out, or announced at some point in the future that they are, shall we say, descaling and moving production over to Europe. Would not surprise me. And of course, the next one, the Australian deal. So the deal in December of 2021 was almost entirely focused on goods, with tariffs being eliminated on exports for both countries for a 15-year period. So this is the insane thing, that these tariffs over a 15-year period are just going to come down. And especially when it comes to farm stuffs, UK farming is going to take a massive hit on this trade deal, a massive hit. So the government said that it would unlock over £10.4 billion of additional trade with the country by at least 2030, while ending tariffs on all UK exports. Others were, of course, not so positive. The UK farmers are angry that Australia has been given full access to sell beef and sheep meat in the UK, while there was a ban on beef going the other way. A year later, George Eustace, the former environmental minister, who was also part of the negotiations, said it was, quote, not actually a very good deal for Britain, and it gave away far too much for far too little in return. Yeah. Ultimately, this trade deal is going to be one of many trade deals that either A, we have to drop, or when eventually, we re-enter into the EU, we just say, sorry, Australia, we're not trading with on this trade term anymore. We'll trade with you on EU terms instead. That's probably what's going to end up happening. So, New Zealand. This February 2022 deal largely mirrored the Australian one, with similar concerns from UK meat farmers about being undercut by cheaper imports. Tariffs of top at least 10% on products were removed for most, while visa restrictions for travel and residency were now eased. The government estimated that it would also add £800 million a year to the UK economy by the mid-2030s. But the overall impact was negligible. It represents just a 0.03% of boost to GDP by 2035, and the Australian and New Zealand trade deals come into effect in last May. So they have not had the big impact. Remember, Australia and New Zealand were the ones that were big hyped up. Why? Because these were the two post-Commonwealth countries. There was a lot of sort of leave propaganda about, you don't understand. When we joined the EU, we sort of abandoned Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand really don't care about having trade with a country that's all the way around the other side of the world. Why? Because they're in the Pacific. There's a lot of stuff going on in the Pacific. But here's the thing where Brexiteers get wrong. While, yes, the Pacific is a growing area for trade and international GDP, the countries that are going to benefit from that growth, from that increase in GDP, aren't going to be us who just happen to have joined things like the Comprehensive Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's going to be countries like Australia and New Zealand. But of course, the free market fundamentalists that, people like Liz Truss think, we just do a trade deal and somehow growth, again, doesn't work that way. So, of course, speaking of the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, while technically, of course, not a new trade deal, the UK's joining of the CPTPP means a range of export products can be traded tariff-free with member nations. These include Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, Canada, Mexico, but not the US. The deal agreed last March also means that countries must adhere to certain unified regulations, such as food standards. And again, we've talked about what that means. If you think the EU is sort of, here is everyone, we're going to be singing from like the same hymn sheet, you can go up, but you can't go down. This is what the progressive partnership is. We might be up here, Malaysia might be down here. we have to accept their lower standards. That's how it works. However, these Pacific Partnership agreements can be overridden by individual trade deals with specific countries, which the UK is still trying to secure these direct deals with member states such as Canada. And of course, that fell through completely. Analysis has now found that exporting to countries in the Pacific Partnership amounted to just 8% of UK exports in 2019. This is less than the UK's total trade with Germany. As we've said before, does not make any economic sense. Does not make any economic sense to just ignore Europe. And it just makes so much more economic business sense, as we've said before, to rejoin the EU. So, deals, of course, not being struck. As you know, the US has completely shelved these. I don't even think if Trump wins the next one, the Democrats aren't going to let it through. There's obvious reasons why, of course, with the problems going on in Northern Ireland, they're probably not going to let those through. India. When negotiations began with India and the UK at the start of 2022, it was hoped that as early as October, there would be a deal in reducing tariffs on exports such as cars and Scottish whiskey and providing better access to the world's fifth biggest economy. However, we are still waiting, with experts saying that any pact is unlikely to become before the Indian national elections this spring. So effectively, probably not going to happen. Ultimately, we don't still know what's really going to come from this trade deal. And it worries me the fact that we gave away so much when we were trying to talk to a very large economy what they would get in return and what damage that could potentially do to the UK economy. And of course, potentially suck jobs away from the UK over into India. But there you go. So others, there are still others, of course, in the work. So as well as Canada, talks are continuing with other nations, including Israel, Mexico, South Korea, and the UK began negotiating with the Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE in July of 2022. Experts have predicted that a deal with Switzerland, which is the sixth biggest market for the UK to export services to, could very well be the next one reached. Again, why are we focusing on these other countries when we literally have one of the biggest markets, our biggest trade partner, literally right on our doorstep? Economically, does not make sense for us to be outside the EU. And you've seen the polls. People are trending that way. People are realizing Brexit's a mistake. Trust me, when you start to see chaos at the border, when we start to see price increases, when Jacob Rees-Mogg comes out and say, "Oh, this was never meant to happen. Brexit isn't being done correctly." No, remember, it's people like him that said, "Oh, don't worry, we can somehow make Brexit this wonderful thing. Food prices will be cheaper." Again, not going to help. Not going to help at all. And you will probably see, as a lot of people have said, price increases for very basic food and vegetables, especially in the UK, is probably going to go up, which is not going to be helpful for a whole lot of people. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.